Okay, we're going to continue on with our discussion and we're going to look at the shortened version of Chapter 32. Chapter 32 is about what goes on in Latin America during this time period, during World War I through the present. We're really going to emphasize post-World War II in this chapter, but let's look a little bit at it. We're also going to look at a couple of examples. Primarily, we're going to emphasize what goes on in Cuba, and we're going to use Guatemala as another example for ourselves. Okay, so what was Latin America's position during the Cold War? Latin America is, if you've done your homework, you know this, is a third world continent. Now, third world simply means you're either part of the first world, which is the United States and our industrial allies, or the second world, which is the Soviet Union and her allies, or you're the third world. You're non-allied countries. Usually you're not very developed. You're not, it comes to mean a term that means poor. You'll see a good map of the first, second, and third world coming up here in a second. Shared traits with Africa and Asia, less developed, but some very key differences you're going to notice over the next two chapters. First of all, Latin America has Western social and political structures. In other words, they've got governments that look a lot like what you see in Europe or in North America. And they have tight economic links to both the United States and Europe. Mostly still at this point, even in the 20th century, even in the 1900s, still mostly working as a supplier to of raw materials to the more industrialized Europe and United States. Going on with this, what was Latin America's position during the Cold War? It's still third world continent. Again, they're focused on exports, which makes them vulnerable to world demand. In other words, if world demand goes up for sugar, say for instance sugar, which is Cuba's dependent upon, Cuba does very well. If sugar demand drops or if the price is too low, Cuba suffers. And there's a political, cultural, and economic dependency cycle. Notice on this map, I like this map, the red is the third world. So you've got Latin America, Africa, and across here, across South Asia. Most all of these are former colonies. Then you've got the first world, which is United States and her allies. You see U.S., Canada, Western Europe, across here. And notice Turkey. Turkey, yes, Turkey is part of NATO. We've mentioned that before. Japan out here, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand down here. You see them moving around New Zealand. So this is the first, second, and third worlds. All right. Now, what about, oh yeah, Mexico. What's going on in Mexico? Describe the history of Mexico and the PRI. The PRI is the Party of Institutionalized Revolution. Call it ironic because it's hard to picture institutionalized revolution. If you'll remember, though, the PRI comes in after the Mexican Civil War, which lasted 1910 through 1920. 1910 through 1920, there's this period of instability, and what emerges is a one-party system. Um, it is a one-party system, though, that can still lose an election. Unlike the Soviet Union, which also has a one-party system, here you can lose the election. Uh, it causes the PRI to sort of move to the middle and try to keep a lot of different groups happy so it stays in power. The problem is they have political corruption and they fail to improve social conditions. When they fail to improve social conditions, um, they start to fall out of favor with people in Mexico. And in the year 2000, Vicente Fox and the PAN Party defeat the PRI. So the PRI lasts from the 20s through the year 2000. Not that it goes away, but it does not dominate Mexican politics like it once did. Now, Guatemala follows a very different path. Here we've got a prime example, and notice I've got Guatemala up here on the map. You get a prime example of what's going on with U.S. intervention. The U.S. intervenes in Guatemala in what is predominantly an Indian nation. Now, this is a nation with few European settlers. Guatemala has few European settlers. There are not many remnants of African slaves. It's mostly Native Americans, Amerindians. Some reformers pop onto the scene. Juan comes on and he tries to institute an income tax. He also says, I'm going to have some land reform. Basically what he says is, he says, I'm going to take some of the land that's not being used, um, even if it's owned by somebody, and distribute it to those who are less fortunate. He also appeals to national pride. The problem for him is that his policies come in conflict with a group called United Fruit Company. United Fruit Company is a U.S.-owned company, and it comes down, and you can see in this picture, picks bananas and a variety of fruit. It's a foreign-owned company. It does not want income tax because that's going to hit it hard. A per-person tax is better for it because the poor have to pay just like it does on a per-person basis. But an income tax can really hit a company pretty hard. And as there's growing nationalism and this sense of pride in what is ours belongs to us, they stand to lose property, and the United Fruit Company doesn't want that. But it gets even worse for them. In 1951, a military leader takes over, and he goes further. He says, okay, I'm going to nationalize. You remember nationalize means the government takes over a company. I'm going to nationalize transportation and the electrical system. And he says, I'm going to take this unused land that you guys may own, but you're not cultivating, and give it to some of our extremely poor. The oligarchy, and by oligarchy here I mean the rich few, the few landowners and the United Fruit Company feel very threatened. So the U.S. decides to intervene, and the U.S. and the CIA sponsor military force to take over the government. And surprise, surprise, being sarcastic here, the new government helps out why the wealthy landowners and the U.S. United Fruit Company. But from then on, for Guatemala and places in Central America, it will get worse. They will end up with military governments, often with the support of the United States, who don't deal with the problems of the peasants, don't deal with the problems of the citizens, and this spurs guerrilla movements. Key theme, and I'd like you to keep this in mind for essay writing, a key theme is that during this time period, Latin America won't be allowed to change without foreigners, without the U.S., in this case, without U.S. help or approval. You're not going to see any reforms, changes. Okay, we'll stop and pick up with the Cuban Revolution here in just a minute.